Hello all you lovely people. In today's video we are going to take a look at why some scholars and skeptics think the Torah was not written by Moses. In the deserts of the ancient Near East, a text emerged that became a foundational legal and moral framework for Western civilization. This is the Torah, a word meaning instruction. It is also called the Pentateuch, comprised of 5 books: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. For millennia, Jewish and Christian traditions held a consistent view of these texts. They believed that these 5 books, from the origin of the world to the arrival of the Promised Land, were authored by Moses. This claim of Mosaic authorship is a primary pillar of classical biblical theology. Under this view, the instruction carries divine authority because it was recorded by a prophet who received it directly from God. In the modern era, academic scholars moved away from traditional reverence to analyze the Torah as a collection of historical data. Forensic scrutiny led many to doubt the traditional account of a solo author. By analyzing the original Hebrew, scholars identified structural anomalies, geographical descriptions outside the Mosaic timeline, abrupt narrative shifts, and varying deity names. These textual seams suggested the text is actually a multi-generational compilation, a patchwork of earlier documents woven together by later editors. While the Torah reads as a unified law, forensic investigation reveals the traits of a layered literary architecture. This academic shift is driven by specific textual problems. The first is found in Deuteronomy 34, which records the death and burial of Moses. Scholars argue that a writer does not record his own obituary. The traditional response suggests that an authorized successor, like Joshua, or a later figure, like Ezra, added the final chapter. This update would conclude the narrative without negating Moses' authorship of the previous books. Criticism 2 focuses on discrepancies in the creation accounts. Genesis 1 provides a linear view of the cosmos, while Genesis 2 provides a topical narrative on mankind. Traditionalists argue these are complementary lenses, a macro and micro perspective. The third criticism involves historical anachronisms. Genesis 12:6 states that the Canaanites were then in the land. This phrasing implies the author is writing from a future where the Canaanites had already been displaced. This defense points to the role of ancient scribes, who functioned as authorized editors. They updated archaic place names and added explanatory notes for their own generation, a practice that preserves the original core while ensuring current clarity. These initial anomalies are most often resolvable through the lens of ancient scribal culture and Hebrew literary technique. Criticism 4 targets the flood. Genesis 6 instructs Noah to bring 1 pair of every animal into the ark, but Genesis 7 specifies 7 pairs of certain animals. Critics view this as a clumsy merger of 2 flood myths. The counter-argument clarifies the detail. The command for 7 pairs applies specifically to clean animals used for sacrifice. It represents a sequential elaboration of the first general command. The 5th criticism notes that the text cites 40 days of rain, but later says the water prevailed for 150 days. Traditionalists see these as distinct phases, the duration of the storm followed by the duration of the flood's peak. The final criticism compares the 10 Commandments in Exodus 20 with Deuteronomy 5, noting wording changes. Context explains this. Exodus is the legal code at Sinai, while Deuteronomy is Moses' pastoral application 40 years later on the plains of Moab. What appear to be fractures are evidence of an intentional, evolving application by a single leader to a nation in transition. If traditional harmonization is rejected, the primary academic alternative is the documentary hypothesis, a theory mapping the Torah's origins through 4 distinct sources. The Yahwistic, J source, uses Yahweh for vivid, earthy narratives. The Elohistic, E source, uses Elohim for transcendent dreams. The Deuteronomic, D source, emphasizes covenant morality. The priestly, P source, focuses on ritual purity, dates, and tabernacle specifications. This hypothesis provides a secular model for the text's variety, but it requires removing Moses as the primary historical author. The JEDP model is an influential piece of literary analysis. However, it creates a tension for those who follow the testimony of Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus and the apostles validated Moses' authorship as a historical reality. In Mark 12, Jesus quotes the burning bush account as being in the book of Moses. In John 5, he tells his audience that Moses wrote of me. This creates a direct conflict between the fragmented academic view and the consistent witness of the New Testament. Accepting the total decomposition of the Torah into anonymous sources requires a significant reconciliation. If these books are later political inventions, it challenges the historical reliability of the texts Jesus frequently cited to validate his own ministry. For the biblical worldview, Moses cannot be merely a symbolic name for a committee of scribes. He is viewed as the foundational historical lawgiver, because Jesus himself links the truth of his teachings to the words Moses wrote. The debate over the Torah's origins highlights its immense complexity. This text has survived through millennia of careful preservation and intense study. The mystery of the Torah's origins only adds to the depth of its journey through history. In the 1st century, Jesus of Nazareth quoted these exact books and attributed them directly to Moses. If the Torah is a compilation of later sources, the historical record seems to collide with the testimony of Jesus. Resolving this requires looking past our modern assumptions about what it means to write a book. In the ancient world, Moses functioned as more than a name. It was a classification. The Law of Moses served as a cultural title for the entire legal and religious system of Israel. We use similar shortcuts today. When a student says they are reading Shakespeare, they are referring to a body of work that scholars know includes co-authors and editorial revisions. The name describes the authority behind the work, not necessarily the person who held the quill for every line. Our modern definition of authorship is tied to legal copyright and individual creativity. Ancient Near Eastern authorship focused on the source of authority. The person who held the pen was often a scribe. The author was the figure whose status validated the message. Ancient scribes saw themselves as stewards of an ongoing tradition. To expand a law or clarify a narrative was to participate in the original Mosaic authority. These additions were viewed as a continuation of Moses' voice, not a violation of it. Jesus spoke to his audience using the vocabulary of his time. He utilized the authoritative labels accepted by 1st century society, rather than pausing his sermons to provide a lecture on 19th century literary theory. Even within the framework of the JEDP theory, the historical figure of Moses remains the gravitational center. While the sources were compiled later, they all point back to an original foundational layer of law. Even the most critical analysts acknowledge that a distinct legal core had to exist to provide the basis for the later expansions. During the Babylonian exile, scribes built upon this foundation to ensure Israel's identity survived. They encased the ancient core in layers of narrative and ritual detail, creating the complex structure we see today. Jesus taught in a world where the Torah was already a finalized masterpiece. His mission was focused on the theological weight of that text. If he had stopped to explain source redaction or the mechanics of exilic editing, he would have obscured the very spiritual truth he was trying to reveal. Jesus engaged the Torah as a finished divine authority. He addressed the spiritual reality of the text, while leaving the historical mechanics of its assembly as a separate matter for human study. This perspective brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, the concept of an inspired editorial process. Many believers find that divine inspiration can include the hands of the redactors who wove the sources together. The same spirit that guided the original lawgiver is seen as working through the compilers who preserved the traditions for future generations. By the 1st century, the Torah was no longer a collection of disparate strands. It was a closed, finalized scroll. When Jesus referred to the Law of Moses, he was validating the absolute authority of the final product, the canon of Scripture that had sustained his people for centuries. We want to hear your perspective. How do you view the relationship between ancient tradition and modern scholarship? Tell us in the comments and subscribe as we continue to explore the history behind the world's most influential texts.